This is Dr. Jose Saldivar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. This week, my guest is someone who I've been following and someone who I met many years ago. I won't say how many years ago, but I met many years ago in one of my graduate courses, and just thoroughly impressed with her and her work and her scholarship. And she's doing amazing work now. But I'm going to let her introduce herself to you all. So Alma, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners out there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Alma Flores. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and ella. Who am I? I'm a mom, a partner, and also I guess I'm an assistant professor here at Sacramento State University, or part of the CSUs here at California. And my work, I'm a Chicana feminist scholar. I'm a first-gen student. I'm an immigrant. And my scholarship has always been, I think, intimately tied to my own lived experiences. I don't know. I've always seen, I think, my desire to teach and research as something that is connected to who I am and my family and my community. So I do a lot of work around first-gen college students, Chicana Latina feminist pedagogies, methodologies, and also this facet of like, what is the role of parents, or what are the experiences of parents, both in relation to their children, but also parents now more recently who are faculty or who, in my case, are in the CSU system.
Awesome. That's awesome. So Alma, I ask all of my guests, if they had to go back and identify a point in their educational lives where they would say, my education started here, like my real education started at this point, where do you think that point would be for you?
I think for me, it would have to be probably at the end of my second year, like that summer between my sophomore year and I think junior year. So I did my undergrad at UCLA, and I think I was a first gen student. I still am first gen, but I'm also the oldest of three. My parents are immigrants from Guadalajara. And so I also felt this pressure of like being not only the first in my family, but like the oldest, and having to kind of set the standard. And so I think in terms of starting college, I didn't even know what UCLA was about. And I always tell this to my students, that I really ended up at UCLA because of its geographic location to Santa Barbara, which is where my parents lived, where it was like, I don't want to go to UCSB because my parents are not going to let me move out because the university is right there. So the next university that's far but close enough for me to come home is UCLA. And I remember, again, I had never visited the campus. I did not know what like even the prestige that's attached to it. I don't think I realized that until I saw people's reactions. And I was like, oh, it is a really good school. But I chose, so I started as a psychology major. And I think on my dad's side, my abuelitos are teachers in Mexico, or were teachers in Mexico. And I was always interested in education. But I think at the core, I wanted to work with, to help people, or to work in a school setting. So I wanted to be a school psychologist. I didn't know what that was. I think, my last year of high school, there had been an opportunity to do like a job shadow, and I ended up shadowing a psychologist, and I was like, oh, this seems cool. So I chose psychology. And so when I got to UCLA, again, I think it also was one of those majors that I could translate to my parents, or I'm a psychology major because I want to be a psychologist. So it was also easy to like talk about it with my family without them being like, which I ended up majoring in sociology. They're like, what is sociology? But I started the classes, and it was a really difficult transition, just being away from home. But, I was a pretty high achieving student in high school. So I think coming to college and realizing, sorry about that I was competing with a lot of folks that that made me really question if I was as smart as I thought I was, or even this idea of what smart is. And so as I started taking my classes, I did enjoy my classes, but I wasn't really that interested or invested in what we were learning. And let me back up. I didn't necessarily actually enjoy my classes. I was doing well in them. So I was like, well, let's just stick with them. But I think about that summer because I had a mentor. Her name is Dr. Latanya Reese-Miles, and she was the director of the Ronald McNair program. And so I started so UCLA has this program called the Academic Advancement Program, which is really dedicated to supporting first-gen students and other students of historically marginalized communities. And so I really gravitated to the space. I was always there because it was one of those spaces where I really felt like I belonged, and there are other folks that look like me. And so I started, I built this relation, we call her LT, and she started talking to me about my major, and really, I think asking me questions like, well, do you actually are you enjoying it? And I was like, well, I don't hate it. And then she asked me well, what do you read outside of your class, or what gets you excited? And, I shared some ideas. I had started taking, I picked up an education studies minor class, and I was like, I really like my classes there. But there's no education major, right? She's like, well, that doesn't mean you can't do that. And so I think she really pushed me to where she planted this idea of you can change your major. I don't know. And it also it's not just about your major, right? There's more experiences that UCLA has to offer. Because I think I was very much the student that went to classes and that was it, right? And I think those conversations with her really began to illuminate this different way of understanding college that, to be honest, I don't think I had really gotten up until that. And so she's to talk to me about different majors. And she's like, well, what other classes have you really enjoyed? And I think I had taken a cross-listed class in sociology. She's like, well, why don't you think about Soc? I was like, well, I don't really know what I can do with that major again, right? And how am I going to explain that to my parents? I think that's another thing for a lot of first-gen immigrant kids, that it's well, how do you explain that to your parents? And so she, again, I think pushed me to think about and really challenge these ideas of what a major is, and had really integral conversations that I think made me realize even what is the purpose of college? Even I think challenging or thinking about being really critical about who teaches, right? What we learn. Questions that I think I had thought about, but didn't have the language necessarily to name. And so those conversations with her really made me re-envision education, gave me also the tools to kind of name some of those experiences that I was having, and also encouraged me to finally switch my major. I was so afraid that if I did that, I must be a failure. And what were my parents going to think, and what was I going to do with this major? And she really implanted this idea of your major is not going to determine your career, Alma. And that I'm so grateful for her, because it was that moment where I think a lot of things changed for me after my second year. I changed my major. I got involved in research. I started talking with more faculty. I got involved in student orgs. A a lot of things that I wasn't doing before that. And I really thank her for that. And I see that really as a shift for me in terms of like how I saw education in college.
Alma, that's all of that, right? Incredibly powerful. Let me ask you, when we started, you talked about your work, what you teach. You work with first-gen students, right? You yourself were a first-gen student in our first gen.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe because you were first gen more so than maybe a student whose parents had been to college or maybe had older siblings, right? You only knew what you knew because that's what you had been exposed to, right? And so that limited exposure. So all of a sudden you think, okay, I've got to pick a major. It's somehow got to inform what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And so all of this kind of misinformation.
Absolutely.
Made it difficult for you to you said, right. You were hesitant about changing your major because you didn't want to disappoint your parents because you were worried about the career. Right.
Yeah.
And so having this person in your life, this mentor just sounds like, who knows? I have no doubt you wouldn't have finished, right? But to have them come into your life and to kind of show you the way.
Yeah.
So you change your major, you change it to sociology. And as you're doing this and you're trying, you're making sense of your experiences at the university, you're getting involved, talking to other faculty. What do you think, because as a kid, right, they always ask us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so when as a second year, third year student, Alma at UCLA, what are you thinking about? Like, what do you want to do out in the world when you're done there?
Yeah. So LT had really encouraged me to get involved in research. And so, I've always loved school. Like I said, when we lived in Mexico, like I saw my abuelitos in action as teachers and who later became principals. And so I grew up in schools. I really admire and respected the work it is to be a teacher. And so I loved reading. I loved writing. And so LT started talking to me about research, which again, I had no idea what that was. And I always, when I think had assumed research was like lab coat in a lab, which is part of it, but it's not all of it, right? And so when she started talking to me about that, I became much more interested in the way she was presenting it to me. She's like, well, you can research things that are of interest to you. You can make an impact by doing research. And you seem to really enjoy reading and writing. And if you find your interest and that brings you joy, that's a place to explore. I think the other big piece for me as I was having these conversations with LT and with other faculty in my social classes, in my education classes, in my Chicano studies classes, it's like a whole new world, I think, or frame of seeing the world really became apparent for me, where I wanted to do work that would have some kind of impact and that could, I always thought about, I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is pretty white, pretty upper middle class. And I always felt like an outsider through most of my K-12 education. And to the point where I almost felt like I had to hide parts of myself to be able to fit in and navigate school. And I always thought about that person, that young me, and how I didn't want or I wanted to change that. I wanted to somehow challenge that, demystify that. And also, again, like I spoke to earlier, understand that, why did I feel that way? Or why did I feel like I couldn't be myself, or the embarrassment I felt about parts of my culture that I didn't feel were welcome. And so as I was having these conversations, LT started talking to me about research. And then she started talking to me about graduate school, which again, being first gen, being an immigrant, I think I had just assumed like you go to college and then you're just a psychologist. I didn't think that you had to go get a master's, get a PhD, get et cetera. Right. I think part of that came also from my parents' frame, where in Mexico, the education system is very different. And so in many ways I was mirroring that, where I was like, well, I do my 4 years and then either I'm a lawyer or I'm a psychologist. And she was like, no, like, graduate school is an opportunity to also kind of focus in more on what it is that you want to do. And again, had I not had those conversations with her, I don't think I would have understood what graduate school was. But she encouraged me. She said, so I ended up being part of the McNair program, which again is one of those programs that was really life-changing and transformative for me. And LT was the director. And I think also what was unique about our McNair program is that it had this critical race theory framework. It had this social justice framework, which now that I work with our McNair program at my university. That was very unique. Like the McNair program at my university does not do that. And LT, she really also she both encouraged us to pursue education, but she also really problematized it. Right. And she was also really real about how challenging it could be. Right. And how oppressive education could be. But that second year, that switch, I started to think about research, and McNair started, that opportunity of like, well, I can go to graduate school. And that's the path I decided. I was like, I like this. I also, LC was really great about bringing graduate students of color to talk about their experiences. Connecting us with faculty of color. Again, so kind of seeing others that look like me in this path made it realistic for me. And so that's what I ended up doing. I got involved in research. I did a summer research program at the University of Illinois because of her. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. I really did. And, if it wasn't for her, I like you said, I think I would have graduated, but I don't know if I would have had as much of a great experience that I did at UCLA, and would be here today also as a professor.
Alma, you realize how fortunate you are, right?
I do. I really do. Because I do think I was really fortunate to find LT. I also now seeing where I teach at a state school, and I see the differences, right, of having had a UC education in terms of resources and also like who the students are, right? Most of my students are commuters. Most of my students work. Some of them are parents. And a lot of my UC peers, yes, we work, but we often did not. We weren't the majority.
Yeah.
And so I see the privileges that I benefited from being at UCLA, but also how fortunate I was to connect with LT, who really, I think, changed my trajectory at UCLA.
Yeah, absolutely. I say that because I think, and it's no coincidence, right? It seems like based on the scholarship that you're doing, based on even your own, right, the conversation that we had before we jumped into the podcast about your own, this first year seminar that you're teaching, right? But how for you realizing the need to change that course, also recognizing that the McNair program at your institution doesn't look like the McNair program that you experienced, right? And so I think it's obvious, right? You recognize the opportunities and the privileges that you've had, but it also sounds like those experiences absolutely inform the work that you're doing and the experiences you'd like to create for your students. Would you say that, is that a fair assessment?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. I think this is why I encourage students, like, talk to your professors. But I also have to check myself too, because I think their realities are also very different from my college experience, right? A lot of them are living at home, are commuting. Some of them have families. And so I had the privilege of being on campus and just, I work a 10-hour job. Some of my students are working full time, right? And so to ask them to be go visit your professors is different than for me, who had a 10-hour job and then that was it, right? I didn't have the different pressures. And so I do find myself having to remind myself and check myself, these students are different, and there are still ways to get them engaged and to make sure that they have a rewarding college experience, because they also deserve that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you, I think I got caught in that trap, right? Where I was, and even having conversations, being in faculty meetings where there are conversations about our students, and often overlooking the fact that their experiences are different from mine, from maybe my colleagues, and recognizing that they're much more diverse. They've got families, they're working. Alma, let me ask you, because as you were talking and you're talking about the experiences you had and your mentor LT and the role that she played, just such an incredible experience. What advice would you have for first gen students who aren't having those conversations and who haven't, because it sounds like, and I don't know how you would describe it, whether you sought out LT or LT, you were in the space where LT occupied, and your paths converged, right? But for our students that haven't found an LT, right, that are taking classes, and maybe like you said, you described it beautifully, you're just taking classes. I'm showing up, I'm taking classes, I'm not doing anything else. What advice do you have for those students?
I always tell my students to talk to your professors, go to their office hours, or I recognize it's sometimes hard to seek out other on-campus opportunities or get involved in extracurricular activities, because you're juggling a full-time job and you're barely managing your 4 or 5 classes. And so I'm I used to do this in I do this in my first year seminar class. I don't do it in my other classes, but I have an assignment where I actually require the students to come see me during office hours. And I treat it more as a conversation about, look, this is what office hours can be. Tell me about you. Tell me about who you are, because I think one of the big things that was really important for me, and above anything, I think what UCLA gave me were these really strong relationships with friends, like my peers, with faculty, and with mentors. And I think as a student, I didn't really think about it as this is going to provide me benefits in the future. But it did, right? Because then when I was at graduate school, I could, tap into them. I could reach out to them, whether if it was for letters of rec or if I was struggling with something. But I think, and this is, I think, part of my teaching philosophy that I talk about, is that I really do think that at the end of the day, effective teaching really relies on deep and genuine relationships. And I've always really embraced that idea, because I do think and then I do think it matters. Like students don't care what you know. And so they know that you care about them, that you value them. And so these office hour visits with me are a way to get students comfortable with me. Cause I think also as a first year student, you're just like so nervous and trying to figure everything out. And so that's my way of being like, look, just talk to your professors, send them an email. Many of us like sit for 2 hours at our office hour. No one comes. And me, for example, knowing that you're interested in sport broadcasting, and then an email comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a student who's interested in this. I can then forward you that email and be like, hey, and then I can be like, let me help you with this application. I know we talked about it, but I wouldn't know that, right? And so I encourage them to visit their professors' office hours, at least once the semester, because it's not just about getting help with your work, because some of them I think really see it that way, right? That it's just like, well, I don't need help. But I'm like, no, just set up like a 10-minute, 15-minute, I don't know, appointment to talk to them about how they got there and what you're interested in. And so we do that, like we're doing that right now. Like I'm having them interview actually similar to what we're doing right now, where I'm asking them to ask them, how did they get to college? Like what advice do you have for me? How did you choose your major? Because I want them to demystify these ideas that for some reason they all start with, right? That major equals career. And I see how that has some validity in some cases, because I also don't think everything is like linear. No, it's not linear, but I also want them to expand.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of them are students of color. Like I want them to also talk with other faculty of color and connect. And so that's what I do. I'm like, talk to your professors. You're in your classes. Even if it's like, stick around after class, introduce yourself. Because again, I think it's important to build relationships.
Alma, I knew there was a reason why I liked you. So the first, just a side note. So I've been teaching this class and now I oversee it, and it's called Learning Framework. And I remember I piloted the course back in 2003, and I remember I was given a book, and it was like learning strategy, motivation and learning strategies. And so I show up, and they gave it to me on a Friday, and I start teaching it on a Monday. And I'm lost, and I feel for my students. I just told them, hey, we're going to just start meeting. Like, you need to come see me during office hours. We need to have these conversations. We take the class university-wide, and the folks asked me, so Jose, what advice do you have? I said, meet with your students. Sit down and have a conversation. And they thought I was crazy. They were like, who has time for that? That's not, I had a tenured professor tell me, Jose, that's a waste of time. A Latino professor. Jose, that's a waste of time. And I thought, what is, I said, that is, for me, that's been the greatest investment in my teaching, is just sitting down and having that conversation. So Alma, whenever you're ready to write an article or a book called Demystifying the First Year Experience, or the Demystifying College, let me know. But so you're having all of these rich, powerful experiences, Alma, these opportunities, you're doing research. Your mentor introduces you, right, puts the thought of graduate school into your head. And we met at UT. Yeah. So how did you go from UCLA? Why UT? Because I think a lot of students figure, a lot of times they don't know, right? Graduates, I need to do graduate school. Yeah. But then deciding where to apply and where to go. How did you end up at UT?
Yeah. So, again, the McNair program, which, it's one of those things where I feel like it sucks because everyone should have a McNair experience. But it's a very competitive program, right? Like not everyone gets to become a McNair scholar. And so I feel very privileged that I was a McNair scholar, because we had so many conversations about fit and applying. And so again, even with those conversations though, I had no idea like what it meant to go to graduate school. And so at the time I was doing a lot of work on the connection between language and identity. Again, very connected to my experiences of being a English language learner. And so but I've always also been interested in like identity. And so LT was like, start looking at programs that have bilingual, bicultural programs or programs that fall within cultural studies, something like that you could continue this work. And I think another thing that was really important for me to hear, although, you know, UT is a great school, but she was like, you're not applying to the school. You're applying to the program. You're applying to work with professors in that program. And so don't get too caught up with the name, right? Which again is very different from when you go to college, right? She's like, you're really now beginning to narrow your focus. So you really want to look at the program, not necessarily UT as a whole institution. And so I started, I think I compiled a list of like 8 schools. And also, I think not really understanding that a lot of folks take time in between like their college and then their like graduate work. And I didn't, which sometimes I think back and I'm like, I really should have. Like, and I think that's partly because of McNair that was just like, no, go.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Ooh, sorry. And so I applied to, again, I think it was 6 or 8 schools. I think most of them were master's programs. I think 2 were PhD, 2 PhD programs. And with the premise of like, I want to do this work, I actually talked to professors. I think I remember talking to Dr. Luis Urieta, at UT. And so again, this push from LT to be like, talk to students. I talked to students as well. And then another thing, which she was like, see if they'll fly you or they'll host you. And I was like, well, how do I do that? And she was really good about just navigating the whole graduate school application process, which again, I did not know. And also I was able to rely on faculty that I had built relationships with who were like, you know what, I have someone at UT, let me connect you with them. Or let me connect you with this person here. And so I was able to start having those conversations. I ended up, so I didn't get into the PhD programs, which again, I think at the time, for some reason, I was devastated, but I'm really glad I didn't because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So I think the master's program was a really good opportunity. And so even now with my students, I'm like, it's a good idea to do the master's to see if like, this is what, because a PhD is a huge investment. So I got into all the master's programs. And I remember, again, going back to this advice where LT was like, don't fall for the name. I got into Harvard. And of course, my parents were like, well, that's where you're going, right? Like, why wouldn't you go to Harvard? How could you say no to Harvard? And they actually, I remember they flew me out and then they show me the financial aid packet. And I'm just like, there's no way. Like, even with the scholarship they were offering, it was ridiculous. And so, I had to have these. And I feel like being a first-gen kid also made me have these conversations with my parents, which at times were quite frustrating because I was like, why don't you know this? But also we've learned a lot together. And my sister and my siblings' other experience has been so much different because we went through it together. We had to navigate financial aid. And so they now know like what it means to have a tenure track position, what it posted, because we've been through it all together. And so I had to talk to them like, yes, Mom, Harvard, of course, like who would not want to be affiliated with that? But when like the faculty, like it was a program where I didn't really connect with the faculty. It was, the 1 year like master's program. And the financial aid was ridiculous. Like, Mom, I'm going to get into hella debt. And so the other programs offered me some financial aid, but ultimately UT, again, being a McNair scholar, they offered me the McNair Fellowship, which paid basically for my master's. And so that is really hard, right? You usually don't get funding for master's program. And so that was already enticing, but then I don't remember. They also had like a preview day. And so I went and I talked to Doctora Frankis, who ended up being my advisor, and other faculty there. And I was like, I really like the faculty at the UT School of Ed. I know it's changed since I was there, but was amazing. I knew Dr. Angela Valenzuela's work. So I was like, oh my gosh, like the opportunity to learn with her. And so when I visited, I was like, I could see myself here. And of course, that layer of like, I don't have to take out more loans. And it's 2 years too, right? Because there was also this layer of like, well, I'm going to have to move. Like the whole point I ended up at UCLA was that I was close enough. And it was really hard, Jose. I remember that first year, I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I'd never been outside of California besides Illinois, and that had been with friends through that research program. And so I found myself by myself in this apartment at UT, where I didn't really know Austin. I had no idea what Texas was about. In a program where I was like the youngest for sure, like where the students I was working or TAing for were like sometimes older than me. And so it also felt like I needed to have that experience to also realize like, okay, if I'm going to do this PhD program, I need to be closer to home. This is what I need. Like these are my, like this is my wants. And so I wanted to be, and that really played a role into then applying to PhD programs, which if the UT program had been like in California, I would have stayed, but the distance just became really hard for me. Like I realized that I needed family to be closer.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, you mentioned something earlier about doing the master's because also the PhD is a big commitment, and it's good. The master's is kind of a good primer and a good way of figuring out, do I want to do this? Do I want to do and commit another several years to this? So you got that from UT. You after that experience, you were like, I want to continue studying. Yeah,
I mean, I loved the program. I really did. I think I was just homesick, and I was like, and also I think my identity became all about school. Like, that's all I did. Like, I was TAing, but there was no Alma, like, outside of UT. And so I also really struggled with that. And I think it's because I had been removed from all my communities, networks, that I was like, I'm just a student. Like, that's all I do. And I wanted to feel more connected beyond just being a student at UT.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So you complete the master's at UT, you go and you return to UCLA.
Do I know?
And so, Alma, you're currently teaching, right? Assistant professor. Anything else on the horizon for you? Sounds like you've done everything that you've wanted.
I don't know. I really, I think having become a parent or a mom has also made me, I think, reevaluate like who I am. I'm like that. I'm not just a professor or scholar. That I'm also a mom, and there's all these other things that I also value and care about. I think one of the things I missed when I started as a professor was the activism that I had been involved as a undergrad or graduate student. And so the union for me has been a place to because sometimes I feel like I quote unquote made it, right? But am I really having the impact that I envisioned back when I was at UCLA as an undergrad? And how am I really changing these systems so that they are accessible, but not just accessible, but that are like just transformative, that are different. And so I've been really having these points of reflection of like, you know, I'm in my fourth year now. Like, what, like, am I having the impact I envision I would be having? And I love working with students, but I think there's this other big piece for me of like the structures and policies that make up the professoriate, the university college experience, right? And really being unapologetic about that. Again, mentors are important. I have a great mentor here who is this like fierce Chicana who is just always pushing me that and I need that sometimes, because sometimes I'm like, well, can I do that now as a like, I'm a faculty member now. Like, can I really push back the way I used to do as a grad and undergrad student? And I see her do that. And so right now with the union, we're really trying to change the structures and policies of the university. So one of the big things that I've been really working with is like parental leave, like how crappy it is. And again, like this pushes out mostly women of color or women who are faculty. And so how are we so invested in equity and inclusion, but yet we have these policies that push out a lot of faculty of color? Even the fact that we're a Hispanic serving institution, but I was two of like 80 professors that were Chicanas. Like, so all of I'm really, I think, see myself, yes, I think doing the research, yes, you doing the teaching, but also like, how am I changing these structures and systems so that we can not only get more folks of color in these systems, but that we can change them so that we're not getting pushed out. Even right now, like going through the retention, tenure, and promotion, how we measure like the fact that our productivity is so tied to our worth is hard for me to grapple with, because I always think of, I think it's Sandy Grande, is it? Oh my gosh, I don't want to misquote, but being in the university, but not part, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting, but I've been really thinking about that, right? Like, how am I so invested in a system that can be so oppressive because I work here, right? But how can I also like challenge it and change it and make it better, like this first year program, right? Which has been really hard because people are like so invested in this curriculum and this is how we've done. I had the same experience, Jose. They handed me this reader with readings from the 1970s. I'm like, why are we teaching theories from the 70s and 80s about student development? Like this is not who our students are. No. And it's hard to make those changes because people are comfortable, and it's just, you know, I always hear it's just the way it is, and I'm like, well, no. And so that's been hard, but I really have hope that my time either here at Sac State or wherever I continue my academic journey is that I make some change in terms of not just like teaching, but also these policies and structures that are in place to, just marginalize our students or faculty. Yeah.
Alma, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you talking about this feeling like you made it. And I think, and so some people might listen to this and feel like, what? No, we didn't make it, like, or like we're never, our work is never done. And for me, like, I can't speak for all of my listeners, but for myself, for me, I like that. I like that my work's never done. I like that there are always systems to challenge, that we can always make programs better. We can make it more equitable, right? Yeah. We can make experiences better for our students and for our colleagues and for those that are coming behind us. And so I appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, because I think it's an incredibly valuable and important work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Alma, thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
And I want to be respectful of your time, but I mean, I feel like we can, like, there's plenty more that we can go into. We didn't really get into your PhD program. Maybe I'm purposely leaving that out so we can come back at another point to talk about that. But I just thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that experience, your experience. Thank you for the lessons. As we get ready to sign off, what final piece of advice would you give listeners?
I think I have to go back to the relationship piece. Like, I think relationships are so important to building community. And, when I think back to UCLA and these other programs, it's like, it's the people I remember more. And so I want that for students. My best friends are my friends that I met my first year at UCLA, who sustained me in a place where I didn't always feel like I belonged, but who became family. And so I think I want to encourage folks to remember how important relationships are to navigating higher education, and that we need our people. Find your people, whoever your people are, but we need them to survive and thrive, not just survive, thrive in these spaces. Because I think it's important that you find whoever your people are, and that you value and nurture those relationships just as much as the homework, the whatever it is, the extracurricular activity, because relationships sustain us.
Beautifully said. Alma, thank you. Thank you again. This concludes another episode of the Way to College podcast. Tune in next time. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.